Usually when we talk about getting a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute total precision. Like, think about the process, right?
Right.
You walk into the hospital and they take an x-ray and the doctor just slaps that film up against the light box and they point to this jagged white line and tell you, boom, right there, that's the fracture.
It's undeniable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a process where the problem is entirely visible, it's quantifiable, and the solution, even if it hurts, it's mapped out in some medical textbook. And humans, we just love that kind of clarity. I mean, it gives us this tremendous peace of mind to know that things can be categorized instantly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a completely natural psychological reaction to uncertainty. We actively look for binary models because, well, the human brain expends way less energy processing things that are already classified for us. It's either broken or it's not broken.
Yeah.
The treatment is path A or path B. And having that clinical certainty is, it's basically the equivalent of having a highly detailed topographic map before you even start a hike.
But the thing is, then you leave the hospital, right? You sit down at your desk and you decide you want to create something new. And suddenly that magical x-ray machine just vanishes completely.
Poof, gone.
Right. Out of nowhere, you're staring at this landscape that is just, frankly, completely foggy. You have an idea, you feel that initial rush of energy, but there's no illuminated screen telling you exactly where to start building or, which problem you should tackle first or how to stop the whole thing from just falling apart in 6 months.
Yeah, because the beginning of literally any project is just the territory of absolute fog. And the fundamental mistake that I'd say the vast majority of creators make is that they try to take that medical mindset, that desperate need for clinical certainty, and apply it to an environment that is just inherently chaotic. It's organic and it's messy.
And that is exactly why we're here today. So, welcome to this deep dive. Our mission in this conversation is to really decode how to navigate that fog. We want to look at how you take any idea, whether that's a side project you're tinkering with on weekends, or some massive initiative you want to pitch at your day job, or even the foundation for a completely new startup, and actually make it happen.
Yeah, without getting stuck.
Exactly. We want to dismantle that natural tendency we all have to get totally bogged down in this endless cycle of planning that honestly leads absolutely nowhere.
And to structure this whole analysis, we're going to be dissecting a piece of source material that has acted as a compass for, thousands of creators. We're talking about the book, The Art of the Start, written by Guy Kawasaki. And what makes this text so incredibly valuable is that it just completely ignores traditional academic theory.
Oh, totally.
Like, he's not going to teach you how to write a 100-page business plan just to impress some economics professor. That's not what this is.
Far from it. It's much more like a tactical survival guide. And for you listening right now, the immediate benefit of the concepts we're exploring today is that they are literally designed for the friction of the real world. We're going to break down the psychological traps that paralyze projects in their very first month, how to, structure immediate action, and most importantly, how to build something that actually has a genuine impact starting today.
Right.
And I think the mandatory starting point here is confronting your original motivation, because the sources are super clear on this. Starting a project with the primary goal of just making money is basically a guaranteed recipe for failure.
Yeah, Kawasaki establishes this as the ultimate initial filter for any venture. He says the real goal isn't financial wealth. It's what he defines as making meaning. And I really want to stress that this isn't some romantic pie-in-the-sky idealistic stance. It's a purely pragmatic survival strategy. Well, when we analyze the trajectory of initiatives that actually last, we see that they're almost always born out of a desire to make the world marginally better, or, to elevate the quality of life for a very specific niche of people, or to right some operational wrong that nobody else is bothering to fix.
I constantly wonder how many projects just die because they flip that priority. Because, pop culture just bombards us with this image of the wildly successful entrepreneur surrounded by luxury cars, selling their company for billions of dollars. And it is so tempting to use that image as your engine.
Oh, of course it is. It's the dream.
But if money is your only real metric for success, what happens when you hit that inevitable period, which, let's be real, sometimes lasts for years, where the project is barely surviving and your bank account is totally in the red?
You quit. That is the exact mechanism of failure right there. If your fuel is exclusively financial, the engine simply shuts off the second the revenue doesn't meet your initial expectations. But if your motivation is to fix a problem that genuinely frustrates you or to make your users' lives better, you have this deep reserve of emotional resilience. Money, when you look at it from this perspective, isn't the target. It's just the logical, natural byproduct of having effectively created meaning over a sustained period of time.
It's basically the difference between operating like a mercenary who's just looking for a quick payout and operating like a missionary who is defending a cause.
That's a great way to put it.
And that missionary mindset needs a flag to rally behind, which brings us to this concept that completely changes how we communicate our intentions, the mantra. The text strongly suggests that we should immediately ditch those long traditional corporate mission statements and replace them with a simple 3 to 4 word mantra.
Yeah, let's just think about the mechanics of your standard corporate mission statement for a second. Generally, they're drafted by a committee. And whenever a committee writes something, the main goal is usually just to not offend anyone.
Right, you want to keep everyone happy.
Exactly. They try to please all the stakeholders, the shareholders, the customers, the employees, the board of directors. And the mathematical result of trying to please everyone is this dense, jargon-filled paragraph that is totally incomprehensible and lacks any actual power to direct behavior.
Oh man, I always think of those statements that say something absurd like, uh, we provide cutting-edge integral solutions to maximize shareholder value while maintaining a synergistic commitment to global sustainability.
Oof, yes, word salad.
It's literally like the terms and conditions on a software update. Nobody reads them, nobody cares about them, and they certainly don't help an employee make a tough decision on a random Tuesday afternoon. But a mantra, on the other hand, functions completely differently on a cognitive level.
It does. The book uses Canva as the definitive example of this tool in action. Their mantra is just 2 words, democratize design,
Wow.
right? That simplicity is actually a tactical weapon. If you're a programmer working at Canva and you're trying to decide whether to add some super complex new feature to the platform, the mantra gives you your answer instantly. If the new feature makes the software harder for a beginner to use, well, then you aren't democratizing design. The mantra acts as this daily, decentralized filter for decision-making.
Democratized design. It just locks into your working memory instantly. It's like the catchy chorus of a hit song, It gets stuck in your head and it guides your actions. So to bring this down to reality for the person listening right now, if you are actively looking for that idea that is actually worth turning into a mantra, the text proposes 3 fundamental questions. You use these to audit your environment and find real opportunities instead of just, waiting around for inspiration to strike while you're in the shower.
Yeah, and the first of these questions is simply, so what? And this question is really an exercise in analytical anticipation. It's not about looking at what's happening today, but projecting the second and third order consequences of whatever trend is happening right now.
So, meaning like, if we see that the adoption of artificial intelligence is automating basic copywriting, the opportunity isn't to just build yet another copywriting tool. The question, so what forces you to think, okay, if basic text is now free and infinite, what suddenly becomes more valuable?
Exactly. Maybe the opportunity is in human curation of that information or fact-checking or something completely adjacent. The second question comes from a much more visceral emotion, which is there a better way? This is basically the monetization of frustration.
The monetization of frustration. I love that.
Right. When you're doing something at your day job and you just feel like the process is unnecessarily slow or bureaucratic or prone to errors, that irritation is incredibly valuable. Instead of just complaining about it at the water cooler, you document the friction. That exact friction is the space where a new project or company can be born.
And then the third question acts as kind of the bridge to reality, which is it feasible? This is where we look at whether current technology stuff that maybe 5 years ago was impossible or way too expensive now actually allows us to solve those old problems in a radically new way. But, having the idea and answering those questions doesn't actually guarantee that you are the right person to pull it off. The sources introduce this super rigorous self-evaluation model here called the sweet spot.
The sweet spot is this intersectional framework. It demands that you analyze your idea through 3 non-negotiable lenses. First is expertise. Do you actually have the technical or market knowledge to pull this off? Second is opportunity. Is there a real pain point in the market, and are people actually willing to pay for a cure? And third is passion. Do you care enough about this specific problem to dedicate a massive chunk of your life to it?
I want to propose a little exercise for you listening right now. Mentally map out that side project you have hidden in a drawer, or maybe the initiative you're currently leading at work. Run it through the filter of those three lenses. Let's say the market opportunity is huge, right? And you definitely have the technical expertise to build it. But if you're being brutally honest with yourself, the topic absolutely bores you to tears, you lack the passion, what's going to happen is that the very first time you have a crisis with a vendor or you go a full month with zero sales, you're going to jump ship because sheer willpower requires passion to sustain itself.
Or let's look at the exact opposite scenario, which is just as dangerous. Let's say you have an overwhelming passion for the topic and you found a crystal clear opportunity in the market, but you completely lack the technical expertise to actually build the solution. Now, doing this analysis doesn't mean you have to just throw the idea in the trash. What it does is tell you precisely which piece of the puzzle you're missing. It tells you that your unavoidable next step is to go find a partner or an employee who brings that specific expertise to the table. The sweet spot isn't just a diagnosis. It's a roadmap of your requirements.
And this is exactly where our own human psychology loves to play tricks on us. Let's say you found the sweet spot, you have your catchy mantra, and you've identified the perfect opportunity. The instinctive reaction for most people, and I am definitely guilty of this, is to open a blank document and start writing a master plan. We somehow convince ourselves that we need to predict every single variable, model out 5 years of financial scenarios, and, I don't know, design the perfect logo before we ever speak to a single actual customer.
Oh, it's totally a comfort trap. Excessive planning masquerades as progress. Your brain hits you with a dose of dopamine because you feel like you're working really hard on your project. But in reality, you are just procrastinating. You're avoiding the terrifying moment of facing the market's judgment. The conception phase is safe and cozy. The launch phase is incredibly vulnerable. And this is where the text takes a really sharp turn and drops its Harsakiest truth execution kills planning.
Which throws us straight onto the battlefield of launching, leaving the safe little bubble of Word documents and stepping into the chaos of the real world. And the vehicle for making that leap is what the tech world calls the MVP, the minimum viable product. Now, looking at the material, I noticed that the definition of an MVP here is extremely strict about what makes a product acceptable versus what makes it just plain unacceptable.
Yeah, the dividing line is clinical functionality. A minimum viable product must, by definition, actually execute the core promise that you are making to the user. So if your value proposition is a piece of software that syncs calendars, the MVP has to sync those calendars flawlessly. If the system crashes, or if it loses user data, or if it freezes up every 10 minutes, you haven't launched an MVP. You've launched garbage, and the market has absolutely zero mercy for broken products.
But wait, let's pause right there because there's a nuance here that really bugs me. The sources say that if the product works perfectly under the hood, but aesthetically it's just terrible, like the design is clunky, the colors clash, the interface looks like it's from 1995, you should still launch it immediately. My instinct tells me that in today's economy, where brand perception is judged in literally milliseconds and everything is highly polished, launching an ugly product is going to destroy your reputation before you even get off the ground. Why does the author tell us to take that risk?
It's a super valid concern, but it requires us to really understand the psychology of your early adopters. These people are not buying your product because it's a piece of fine art. They are adopting it because they have a severe bleeding neck problem that none of the beautiful, polished solutions currently on the market have been able to fix. If your ugly, clunky interface saves them 3 hours of agonizing work every single day, they will gladly forgive the lack of aesthetics. Plus, a functional prototype, no matter how rough it looks, proves technical competence. It shows investors and early users that you aren't just some crazy person with a whiteboard. You can actually turn an idea into a tangible tool.
That is a fascinating perspective. Basically, early users are buying the cure for their pain. They don't care what the medicine bottle looks like. Ugly is just an opportunity to iterate based on real feedback.
Yep.
But broken is a violation of basic trust. So, okay, once you have that functional product, ugly as it may be, you face the next hurdle, explaining what it actually is, which the book refers to as positioning.
And positioning suffers from the exact same disease as corporate mission statements: unnecessary complexity. When a creator spends 6 months locked in a room building a product, they fall deeply in love with the technical specs. And when they try to explain it to someone, they use this incredibly dense terminology to sound sophisticated.
Oh.
Kawasaki's rule for positioning totally destroys that complexity. He says you must be able to explain what your product does in a single sentence that a 10-year-old could easily understand.
So wave goodbye to words like disruptive, paradigm, synergistic, or scalable. If you walk up to a 10-year-old and say, we've developed a synergistic cloud-based platform to optimize supply chain scalability, you have communicated literally nothing. You're just using buzzwords as a defensive shield.
Right.
But if you say, we help toy stores know exactly where their boxes are so they never miss a sale boom, the kid gets it. And way more importantly, your potential customer gets it in the very first second.
Exactly. That extreme clarity is the mandatory prelude to the moment of maximum vulnerability, which is the product demo. The demo is the exact instant where the story ends, and you have to prove in real time that the tool does what you claim it does. And the structure for a winning demo is built entirely on speed to value, specifically the 2-minute rule.
Which goes against literally everything we see in standard corporate presentations, where the presenter wastes the first 15 minutes talking about the founding history of the company, showing headshots of the team, and rambling about macroeconomic trends. The 2-minute rule demands that you cut all the fluff and get straight to the magic. You have to show how the product solves the problem before the audience's attention starts to drift.
Because the audience, whether that's an angel investor or a potential client, is sitting there internally asking themselves one single question. How does this benefit me? And if you don't answer that question visually and functionally in the first 120 seconds, the window of opportunity just slams shut. And tied to this strict time limit, the author introduces this brilliant tactical principle called the disaster protocol.
Which is essentially just assuming that technology is going to betray you at the worst possible moment. Right?
Oh, absolutely. If you rely on an external internet connection to demo your cloud software, you are literally betting the entire future of your company on a random coffee shop router that you have zero control over. The mathematical probability of the Wi-Fi failing or slowing down or blocking your specific port right in the middle of your pitch is absurdly high. The disaster protocol dictates that you must always, without exception, have a locally hosted version simulated on your hard drive. Or, at the bare minimum, a high-resolution pre-recorded video showing the platform running flawlessly.
It's pure risk management. Okay, so let's zoom out and look at what we've covered so far. You have a punchy mantra. You found your sweet spot. You beat analysis paralysis, built a functional minimum viable product, and you know how to demo its core value in under 2 minutes without relying on Wi-Fi. If you did all of this completely alone, congratulations, you have a brilliant science project. But a project doesn't scale. To turn that prototype into a real company, you have to recruit and lead other human beings. And while the chaos of technology is somewhat predictable, the chaos of human talent is on a completely different level.
It really is, and this brings us right into the mechanics of team building. The transition from being a solo creator to being a leader is where the vast majority of startups just implode. And they don't die from a lack of market demand. They die from a fundamentally flawed hiring dynamic that the book calls the rule of the best. It's this incredibly deep dive into the psychology of ego in the workplace.
We really need to unpack this dynamic because honestly, I feel like it perfectly explains almost every toxic work environment I've ever seen. The rule basically argues that high-performing individuals, the people it calls A players, operate from a mental framework of total security and abundance. Their absolute top priority is the success of the company. So when an A player is put in charge of hiring someone, they actively go out looking for an A-plus player. They want someone who is genuinely smarter, faster, or more experienced than they are in that specific domain.
Exactly. Because the A player doesn't feel like their professional identity is threatened by someone else's talent. They use that new talent as leverage to win. But the existential threat to a company begins the moment you give hiring power to a B player, a mediocre professional. Because a B player operates from a place of chronic fear and insecurity. Their priority isn't the project. Their priority is protecting their own position and maintaining their authority.
It's pure self-preservation. Because if the B player hires someone brilliant, they run the very real risk of being exposed as mediocre, or worse, having that new person replace them. Therefore, to absolutely guarantee that they will always be the smartest person in the room, the B player intentionally hires a C player, and the cascade just continues from there because eventually that C player gets promoted and has to hire someone, and guess what? They hire a D player. In a matter of months, you have completely infiltrated your own company with systemic mediocrity.
You've basically institutionalized incompetence just to protect middle management's ego.
It's the exact same dynamic you see in recreational sports. Think about a team captain who's kind of average but just loves being the center of attention. If you put them in charge of drafting the team for a big tournament, they are never going to draft the star player of the league. They're going to pick players who are noticeably worse than them because they want to make sure they're the one taking all the shots and getting all the high fives from the crowd. The result is that the captain looks great individually in every game, but the team finishes dead last in the standings. By protecting their own spotlight, they guarantee the team loses the championship.
That sports analogy is perfect for illustrating the myopia of ego. And this hiring cascade is the foundational block upon which a company's true culture is built. And I have to say, there is so much confusion out there about what the word culture actually means in the startup world.
Oh, we have totally commodified the concept of culture. Like, you walk into a startup office and you see ping pong tables and a fridge full of free kombucha, and everyone's wearing hoodies, and you just assume, oh, wow, they have an amazing culture. But those are just employee retention accessories. They aren't culture. The book shatters that aesthetic illusion and defines culture strictly in terms of behavior under pressure.
Yes, your organization's culture is basically invisible until things go terribly wrong. It only reveals itself in moments of crisis. How does your customer support team react when a furious client calls demanding a refund because your software glitched? Do they hide behind dense bureaucratic policies? Or do they own the mistake and fix the problem? When two directors have a fundamental disagreement about the product roadmap, is the conflict resolved using data-driven arguments? Or does it immediately devolve into personal attacks and office politics? Those actions, repeated consistently over time, that is your actual culture.
It's not the motivational posters you hang in the break room. It's what you tolerate and what you reward in the daily trenches. And to mold a culture that doesn't just shatter under pressure, the sources introduce a specific archetype of leadership using a Yiddish term, the mensch. And being a mensch is so much more than just being an efficient boss.
A mensch, in the context of building a company, is the absolute embodiment of operational integrity. It's a leader who deeply understands that trust is the single most valuable currency within a team. A mensch has the psychological maturity to stand up in front of the entire company, admit that they made a disastrous strategic decision, and take the full hit for it without looking around for a scapegoat. It is the direct antidote to that insecure B player we talked about. The mensch puts the success of the collective and the mission way above their own need to be right.
That is an incredibly high standard of leadership to maintain. But the pragmatic reality here is that to be able to pay that team of A-plus players and to keep that high-integrity culture alive, you inevitably need fuel. And in the arena we're analyzing today, fuel has a very specific name: money. All of this framework requires capital to move forward, which forces us to wade into one of the most stressful, highly mythologized topics for any creator: the art of getting funding and pitching your idea to investors.
And it's crucial to establish the right perspective before you even start looking for external capital. The most common cognitive error I see is founders confusing investment with validation. So many creators think that the moment they secure a seed round, their company is officially a success. But Kawasaki is blunt about this. The investor's money is just the gasoline: your product, your team, and your ability to execute. That's the engine. If the engine is poorly designed, pumping millions of dollars of high-octane gasoline into it isn't going to make the car go faster. It's just going to cause a much bigger, much more expensive explosion.
Which perfectly explains why the main recommendation from the sources is to delay seeking outside investment for as long as humanly possible. A practice the industry calls bootstrapping. Basically, funding the company's growth entirely through the revenue generated by your early customers, or just burning through your own personal savings.
Bootstrapping is so much more than just a financial strategy. It is an incredible forcing function for operational discipline. When you are operating with severely limited capital and your literal survival depends on closing sale this month, you don't have the luxury of blowing money on vague marketing campaigns or fancy office spaces. You become absolutely surgical with your decisions. You figure out very quickly what the customer actually values, because that's the only thing they'll open their wallets for. Plus, retaining all your equity in the early stages means you protect the original vision from outside interference.
But let's be real, there comes an inflection point. If your product really starts to catch fire and suddenly you need to scale up your server infrastructure massively, or you need to hire a national sales team overnight so you don't lose your first mover advantage, organic cash flow just isn't going to cut it anymore. You have to go out and raise money. And this is where the sources issue a really severe warning about due diligence. They say, you cannot just take a check from the first person who offers it. You have to investigate the investor.
Taking external capital is, for all practical purposes, signing a corporate marriage certificate.
Yeah.
And it is a marriage that is extraordinarily difficult, sometimes legally impossible, to divorce yourself from if things go south. An investor isn't just handing you cash. They are injecting their management philosophy, their personal anxiety levels, and their specific return expectations right into your company's bloodstream. If you partner with an investor who has a track record of micromanaging technical decisions or who completely panics and demands massive layoffs at the first sign of a bad quarter, that toxicity will paralyze your leadership team.
So how do you actually audit that? Because, I mean, in those initial pitch meetings, every investor acts like your best friend. They all promise unconditional support. I feel like the only real way to uncover the truth is to track down the founders of other companies that this person has invested in, specifically companies that went through a really dark period, and ask them point blank, how did this investor behave when your sales dropped 30% last year? That's how you find out if you're getting a strategic partner or a dictator on your board.
Exactly. That kind of back-channel field research is mandatory. Now, assuming you've actually found the right investor, you still have to convince them to hand over the capital. You have to execute the pitch. And Kawasaki has basically immortalized a mathematical framework for this process, designed specifically to eliminate investor fatigue. It's the legendary 1-8-20-30 rule.
This rule is like a scalpel against information overload. Let's break down the mechanics of it. The 10 means your entire presentation must be exactly 10 slides long, not 40 slides, no massive appendix, just 10. You cover the problem, the solution, the business model, the underlying tech, marketing, competitors, the team, basic financials, and current status. Because you only have 10, every single slide carries massive weight.
The hard limit of 10 slides forces the founder to distill their narrative down to the absolute most critical elements. Think about it. An investor sits through dozens of these pitches every week. Their working memory is completely fried. If you throw 30 slides at them, they aren't going to remember a single one. By forcing synthesis, you guarantee that the core of your business model is actually what sticks in their brain.
Right. And then the 20 refers to time. You have exactly 20 minutes to get through the presentation, even if you've been booked for a full hour. Why? Because in the real corporate world, meetings always start 10 minutes late because of a projector issue. Someone has to leave early for a flight, and fundamentally because listening to a one-way monologue for 60 minutes is basically verbal anesthesia. By wrapping up your pitch in 20 minutes, you transform a monologue into a conversation. You leave 40 full minutes for the investor to ask hard questions, challenge your assumptions, and actually show you their real level of interest.
Yes. And finally, we arrive at the most debated, most rigid rule of the entire framework, the 30. This dictates that the absolute minimum font size on any of your slides must be 30 points.
Okay, here's where I need to stop the train and push back on the framework a bit. For the person listening right now who is maybe developing some deeply complex technology, let's say a revolutionary biotech device or an advanced encryption algorithm, properly explaining the mechanics of that technology requires detailed flowcharts, process diagrams, dense technical text. A 30-point font lets you put, maybe 2 sentences on a screen? Isn't that an oversimplification that makes a serious technical project look kind of amateurish?
I hear that objection constantly from technical founders, but it reveals a total misunderstanding of investor psychology. The investor sitting across the table during an initial pitch is not there to conduct a deep dive code review or to peer review the chemistry of your medical device. That kind of technical due diligence happens way later, usually by hired specialists. The investor in the room is evaluating the business viability, and above all else, they are evaluating you as a communicator.
Wait, so the font restriction is really just a communication test?
100%. Let's think about how human attention actually works. If you cram a slide full of tiny text and complicated diagrams, 2 highly destructive things happen. First, the investor's brain automatically stops listening to your voice and starts trying to read the screen. You instantly lose control of the narrative. Second, you yourself will inevitably turn around, stare at the screen, and start reading off it like a script. The second you do that, you break eye contact. And eye contact is the primary conduit for establishing trust. Investors rarely invest in an algorithm. They invest in founders they fundamentally trust. The slide is just a visual anchor, a big image, and a massive headline. The actual technical complexity needs to be explained fluidly and persuasively by you while looking directly into the eyes of your audience. If you can't explain the core magic of your product without reading a dense paragraph, the investor assumes you don't actually master your own domain.
Wow. That is a brutal paradigm shift. You're basically saying the visual deck isn't there to deliver the data at all. It's just there to maintain the dramatic tension of your spoken argument. And beyond the physical structure of the slide deck, the sources highlight a really vital philosophical shift in the content of the pitch itself. Because the natural instinct of almost every creator is to stand up there and talk about their own dreams, right? How much money they need, how big they want the company to be, how this product is going to change their life.
Which is entirely the language of the founder's ego. And to put it bluntly, the investor doesn't care about your ego. The pitch has to be obsessively focused on how your product and your team's ability to execute is going to generate a massive financial return for the person sitting across the table. You have to translate your grand technological vision into the raw language of risk and reward. You have to paint a very clear path to profitability for them.
Okay, let's recap the journey so far, because the architecture here is just fascinating. You've got an idea anchored by a three-word mantra. You defeated the planning trap and launched a functional, albeit ugly, prototype. You built a team while dodging the B-player trap, and you set up a culture rooted in the integrity of a mensch. And now, by mastering investor psychology with the 1-10-20-30 rule, you've secured your funding. The engine is built, and the gas tank is full. But literally none of that matters if you can't get the general public to actually care about what you've built. You have to cross the chasm to reach the users. Which brings us to the phase the book calls proliferation, the dark arts of socializing, evangelizing, and making it rain.
The dynamics of market adoption have shifted so radically. The old-school tactics, where a company just bought a massive block of TV ads, shouted their slogan at the masses, and passively waited for the phones to ring, those are completely obsolete for new startups. Modern marketing is no longer a corporate monologue. It is a highly decentralized ecosystem of conversations.
And the buzzword that keeps popping up in the material is omnipresence. But we really need to be careful with how we interpret that, because the modern creator's instinct is to go out and open accounts on literally every single platform that exists on day one. They think they have to be posting short-form videos, writing newsletters, uploading aesthetic photos, and recording audio 24/7. That approach just leads to immediate burnout and mediocre content across the board. The recommended tactic here is a much more surgical kind of omnipresence.
The directive is actually one of ruthless restraint. You must pick exactly 2 social platforms. Not 3, not 5, 2. But the catch is that on those 2 specific platforms, your execution has to be flawless and entirely superior to your competition. And how do you pick them? Not by guessing what's trendy, but by analyzing where your ideal customer actually spends their time and figuring out which medium aligns best with your natural communication style. And once you're there, the strategy isn't to spam people with buy now ads. The goal is to consistently provide tangential value, either by actively educating your audience about the underlying problem you solve, or by genuinely entertaining them within that niche.
Right, so providing constant value builds the audience. But building the audience is only half the battle. The sources place an almost aggressive emphasis on interaction. Specifically, they say you must reply to every single comment you receive. Why is that extreme level of microinteraction so critical in the early days?
There are 2 distinct mechanisms at play here. Psychologically, when the actual founder of a company takes the time to personally answer a question from an early user, it creates this profound bond of loyalty. You validated that user's existence. But honestly, the more important mechanism today is algorithmic. Social platforms prioritize the distribution of content based heavily on the velocity and volume of interaction in the first few minutes after something goes live. By authentically and rapidly replying to every comment, you're essentially weaponizing the algorithm in your favor. You're training the machine to flag your content as highly engaging, which forces it to push your posts to an exponentially larger organic audience.
So you're basically using human empathy to hack the distribution con. I love that. Now, getting someone to click like on a post or leave a nice comment is a fun vanity metric, but there is a massive canyon between a passive follower and someone who will actually go to bat for your product in a debate. That's the conceptual difference between superficial marketing and true evangelization.
Evangelization is the highest possible tier of user adoption. It's when the user doesn't feel like they merely purchased a software tool, they feel like they've joined a movement. They're buying into the vision of a more efficient or creative or liberated life. But for that evangelization to trigger, there's a golden rule. The founding team has to obsessively use their own product in their daily lives. If you're out there preaching about how superior your communication platform is, but internally your team is coordinating on Slack, that cognitive dissonance will absolutely bleed into your public interactions. Users have a flawless radar for corporate hypocrisy.
It's all about having integrity in your consumption. But beyond just blindly believing in your own tool, there's a mechanical roadblock that creators constantly put in front of their users, and it absolutely murders evangelization before it can even take a breath. Talking about friction. To create evangelists, you have to lower the barriers to entry all the way to the floor.
Friction is basically any cognitive, temporal, or bureaucratic hurdle that you force a user to jump over before they can experience the core magic of your product. Every single extra step reduces your conversion rate mathematically. Just picture the classic scenario. A user sees your content, they get intrigued, and they click a link to try your free version. But instead of dropping them into the interface, you slam them with a massive form, demanding their full legal name, their corporate email, the size of their company, and a credit card just to keep on file.
Oh, I hate that. In that exact millisecond, the user's brain calculates that the annoyance and the invasion of privacy completely outweigh their initial curiosity. They close the tab and they're gone forever.
Exactly. You introduced massive friction at the exact moment their interest was most vulnerable. The correct architecture lets the user jump right into the tool, experience a tiny win or a moment of relief, and only after they've actually felt the value do you kindly ask for the information needed to save their progress. Friction kills momentum. Ease accelerates wonder.
And when you're trying to amplify that initial wonder, most people's instinct is to go grab the biggest megaphone possible. We all want to hire the influencer with 10 million followers to shout out our project. But the book's analysis argues that this is actually a horribly inefficient and overpriced strategy. It tells you to go in the exact opposite direction. Find the local experts.
It's the economics of trust versus the economics of reach. An internet celebrity might flash your product in front of a million eyeballs, but their audience knows it's just a paid transaction. Their actual influence over purchasing behavior is shockingly low. On the flip side, a hyper-focused expert like a respected engineer in a niche forum or the leader of a small technical community might only have 1,000 followers. But those 1,000 followers trust their professional judgment implicitly. If that local expert vouches for your product, your conversion rate will be astronomically higher. It is always better to have deep influence over a small crowd than shallow reach over a massive one.
Okay, so we've covered evangelization and positioning, but there is a very uncomfortable truth lurking underneath all of this. Likes, website traffic, and shoutouts from local experts are great health indicators, but they do not pay the payroll. There's a chapter in the material provocatively titled The Art of Rainmaking, which is just corporate slang for aggressive direct sales. And the philosophy it establishes for early-stage startups is incredibly tribal. The quote is, "Eat what you kill."
It's an unfiltered survival mandate. In the early stages of a company, having highly specialized roles is a luxury you simply cannot afford. Eat what you kill means the responsibility for generating revenue cannot be isolated to some separate sales department. The entire team, starting with the CEO and the lead developer, has to be absolutely obsessed with closing deals. Because if you cannot convince the market to exchange capital for your solution, you do not have a company. You have a heavily subsidized hobby.
And getting that exchange of capital to happen, especially in B2B models where you're selling to other companies, is a really complex exercise in the psychology of persuasion. Because it's rarely enough to just convince the person who's actually going to use the tool. The sources break down this critical tension between the end user and what they call the technical buyer.
You have to deeply understand the conflicting incentive structures operating inside your client's company. So let's say you've built a platform that dramatically speeds up financial data analysis. The junior analyst who spends 10 hours a day suffering in Excel is your end user. He feels the daily pain, and he will love your product because it gives him his life back. Convincing him is the easy part. The structural roadblock is that the junior analyst almost never has the authority to sign the purchase order.
Right. And the person who does sign the check, let's say the IT director, operates on a completely opposite set of incentives. He doesn't care if the analyst saves 3 hours a day. His job, the thing he gets bonuses for, is keeping the network secure, preventing data leaks, and making sure the infrastructure never goes down. So his primary incentive is extreme risk minimization.
And by default, any new piece of software, no matter how innovative it is, represents an unknown variable, which means it's a risk. The technical buyer has absolute veto power. If he even gets a whiff that your platform might be hard to integrate or poses a security threat, he will kill the deal instantly, regardless of how much the end user begs for it. Therefore, the art of enterprise sales is managing a dual narrative. To the end user, you pitch the vision, the speed, and the end of their daily misery. To the technical buyer, you pitch total security, seamless integration, and the promise that his department won't lose any sleep. If you fail to soothe either party, the entire deal collapses.
And to visualize this whole chaotic journey from that very first social media interaction all the way to dodging the technical veto and signing the contract, the mandatory analytical tool is the sales funnel. Now, I know for a lot of veteran listeners, the concept of a funnel sounds basic, but what's fascinating here isn't what the funnel is, it's how you're supposed to audit the leaks in it.
The sales funnel is just a visual representation of the natural attrition rate in customer acquisition. You start with 1,000 people seeing your post. 100 of them click through to your website. 10 of them fill out the contact form. And exactly one person actually pulls out their credit card. The classic mistake inexperienced founders make is looking at that single sale and thinking, okay, I just need to double my ad spend to shove 2,000 people into the top of the funnel. That is a brute force, highly inefficient solution. The analytical creator looks closely at exactly where the massive drop-offs are happening. If 100 people hit your landing page but only 10 leave their email, your massive leak is right there. It's either the clarity of your value prop or the friction in your form.
Exactly. If you tweak that page so that 50 people leave their data instead of 10, you just quintupled your potential revenue without spending a single extra penny on ads. You're patching the holes before you pour more water in. In fact, for the listener, I highly recommend pulling this concept of the sales funnel out of the business world and applying it as a mental model for your everyday life. It's a surprisingly brilliant analytical tool for solving personal logistical nightmares.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How would you translate a sales funnel to a daily life scenario?
Okay, picture this. You're trying to organize a weekend beach trip with a big group of friends. That is always a logistical disaster, right? So map it as a funnel. The top of the funnel is you sending the initial text to the WhatsApp group asking, hey, who wants to hit the beach next month? There are 12 friends in the chat. That's your maximum reach. Next stage. 8 people reply with tons of emojis saying they are 100% down. The top of the funnel looks super healthy, but then you send the link to pay for the Airbnb, the bottom of the funnel, and only 2 people actually transfer the money. The trip is dead. Now, instead of just getting mad at your flaky friends, analyze the leak in your funnel. Why did you lose 6 people between the hype phase and the payment phase? Was the house too expensive for their current budget? Was the payment app you used annoying to set up? Did the dates clash with something else? If you identify the specific friction point in that daily logistics funnel, you can adjust your approach and actually make the trip happen next time.
That is a remarkably sharp piece of behavioral design. You find the cognitive or logistical roadblock and you obliterate it. And bring it back to the startup arena. If you can successfully optimize that funnel, patch the leaks, and navigate the dual sales pitch, you will eventually start generating sustained revenue. But hitting that initial spike in sales is really just winning the first battle in a very long war of attrition. Because as the project matures, the romantic thrill of the launch fades and the grinding operational reality takes over. You have to survive the long game. And that brings us to section 6 of our deep dive obligation. How to form strategic partnerships, how to survive the financial bleed, and how to structure the daily chaos.
Let's tackle corporate partnerships first. Because when a project starts getting some real traction, it's super common for other companies to start circling, proposing these grand strategic alliances. And for a founder, seeing your tiny startup's logo sitting next to a massive corporate logo in a press release is a huge ego boost. But the sources issue a very stark warning here. The vast majority of these partnerships are just black holes that suck up resources without generating any actual value.
The immense danger of corporate partnerships is that they create the illusion of forward momentum. Leadership teams will waste months sitting in endless alignment meetings, drafting memorandums of understanding, trying to integrate communication protocols. But the author provides a brutal acid test to determine if a partnership is actually worth it. The mathematical synergy must be that 1 + 1 = 3. The combined value have to be exponential, not just additive. The absolute rule is that if the proposed alliance is not directly tied to a key performance indicator and KPI that is strictly and quantitatively measurable, it's just corporate theater and you should walk away.
It has to be tied to pure survival metrics, like, will integrating our tech with your platform reduce my customer acquisition cost by 15% this quarter? Or will giving you access to my user base result in 500 confirmed paid subscriptions for me this month? If their answer is just some vague corporate speak about elevating brand awareness or exploring future synergies, it is a lethal distraction. And avoiding distractions is a matter of life and death, because while you're wasting time in PR meetings, there is an hourglass running in the background, and every single grain of sand is cold, hard cash. Which brings us to endurance and the single most terrifying metric in early-stage finance, the burn rate.
The burn rate is the literal heartbeat monitor of your company. It's defined as the net amount of cash your business operations consume every single month, minus whatever revenue you generate. It is your monthly operational deficit. So let's say you have $500,000 of investor capital sitting in the bank, and your fixed cost servers, payroll, rent, software licenses cost you $100,000 a month. But you're only generating $20,000 in sales. Your net burn rate is $80,000 a month.
It's inescapable mortality math. You divide your 500 grand by that 80,000 a month, and you realize you have a little over 6 months left to live. That is your exact corporate date of death, unless you fundamentally alter the equation by radically spiking sales, aggressively slashing costs, or going out and begging for more capital. And the psychological weight of that number is just crushing.
It really is.
Yeah.
A lot of founders develop this voluntary blindness when it comes to their burn rate. It is so deeply stressful to watch the bank account drain that they just stop looking at the financial projections. They tell themselves, oh, next month the marketing will kick in and sales will explode and that'll fix everything. But hope is not a cash flow strategy. You have to manage that specific number with absolute clinical detachment.
And sometimes when you finally force yourself to stare at those numbers and you look at the brutal feedback coming from the market, you realize that your original master plan, the brilliant idea you quit your job for, just isn't working. The customers simply do not want to buy the solution you built. And this is where the text introduces a critical survival mechanism that goes to war directly with the creator's ego: the pivot.
Pivoting means looking in the mirror and admitting that one of your foundational assumptions about the market was dead wrong. And then radically changing the direction of the product or the business model based entirely on the empirical data you've gathered. The biggest obstacle to executing a successful pivot is the sunk cost fallacy, mixed with deep emotional attachment. A founder will stare at a piece of code that took them a year to write, and they will refuse to abandon it, even when the data clearly shows nobody wants to use it, simply because they invested so much effort into it.
They fall in love with their own solution instead of falling in love with the customer's problem. Like if you set out to build a reservation platform for high-end Michelin star restaurants, but you notice that none of the fancy restaurants are adopting it. However, a bunch of local indie coffee shops are obsessively using one tiny sub-feature of your app to manage their coffee bean inventory. You have to swallow your pride and pivot. You are now a coffee shop inventory software company. You have to follow the path where the market is actively absorbing the value you create. Adaptability will always beat stubbornness. Always. And to manage all of this overwhelming complexity, from tracking the burn rate, to deciding when to pivot, to figuring out what features to code today, the book gives us this incredibly tight operational framework. It's a daily management system designed to keep you hyper-focused on survival. It's called the MATS framework. M-A-T.
Right, which stands for milestones, assumptions, and tasks. It is such a practical, grounded tool that I honestly think every creator should have it drawn on a whiteboard directly in front of their desk. Let's break it down. The M is for milestones. And true to form, Kawasaki is absolutely ruthless with his definitions here. A milestone is not finish the new logo design or buy the .com domain. Those are just administrative chores. He defines 5 absolute existential survival milestones. They are critical inflection points for the business. Number 1, prove the concept by building a working prototype. Number 2, secure the capital or the cash flow required to keep the lights on. Number 3, actually ship the first commercial version 1.0, out into the wild. Number 4, get a real paying customer who is not related to you or in your friend group. And number 5, hit the financial break-even point, the glorious moment where your monthly revenue finally equals and surpasses your monthly burn rate. Any effort your team is expending that is not directly pushing the company toward one of those 5 specific milestones is just operational noise.
And to hit those milestones efficiently, you move to the A, assumptions. For me, this is the most intellectually demanding part of the framework. It requires you to make a brutal, honest inventory of every single belief your business model is built on, and then treat every single one of them as completely false until proven otherwise.
The silent killers in any startup are the variables the founder simply assumes are true without having any empirical data. You might assume your customer acquisition cost on Instagram will be $5. You might assume the enterprise sales cycle will only take 3 weeks. You might assume that 80% of your users will renew their annual subscription. Those are not facts. They're incredibly fragile hypotheses. If you build your entire financial runway assuming a $5 acquisition cost and the reality turns out to be $50, your entire model collapses and you run out of money in 4 weeks.
Which perfectly sets up the tactical brilliance of the final letter, the T, tasks. Once you have a list of all these terrifying assumptions that are holding up your house of cards, your daily operational goal, the actual tasks you sit down and do today, must be designed exclusively to test those assumptions in the real world as cheaply and rapidly as humanly possible. Because validating the assumption is what allows you to hit the milestone.
It creates a perfectly closed feedback loop. If your most critical assumption is that end users will actually pay for your app, your task today is not to spend 3 weeks optimizing the backend database to support 1 million concurrent users. Your task today is to slap together a basic landing page, put a Buy Now button on it, drive a little bit of traffic to it, and see if a real human being actually attempts to type in their credit card number. The task tests the assumption. And a validated assumption provides a safe stepping stone toward the milestone.
Milestones, assumptions, tasks. It's literally an engine for generating certainty out of chaos. It's the X-ray machine you build for yourself. But, and this is where our deep dive has to peel back the final layer of the text, all of this incredible corporate engineering, the optimized funnels, the catchy mantras, the strategic pivots, none of it means absolutely anything if, in the process of executing your master plan, you completely lose your moral compass.
This brings us to the final section of our analysis, and really the closing argument of the entire book. Despite being this intensely tactical, aggressive manual on how to dominate a market, the author dedicates his closing thoughts to a purely ethical concept: the art of being a mensch.
No, we touched on the mensch earlier in the context of internal team leadership and taking the blame. But here at the end, the book expands the idea of being a mensch to how you interact with the entire external ecosystem. It's the ethical bedrock that every venture must rest on, and it tackles this by looking at a very common behavior in the corporate world: networking. There is this highly cynical view that networking is just going to mixers, hoarding contacts in a spreadsheet, and constantly calculating what favor you can extract from each person to advance your own agenda.
That is a highly extractive, predatory view of professional relationships, and over a long enough timeline, it is completely self-destructive. The philosophy of the mensch proposes the exact opposite dynamic. It argues that true, powerful networking is rooted in a policy of unconditional generosity. It's about providing genuine value, whether that's sharing knowledge, giving you your time, or connecting two people who can help each other, without keeping some mental scoreboard of favors and without expecting any immediate return. The tech and business ecosystem, no matter how vast it seems, is shockingly small. The collective memory of an industry is unforgiving. Unconditional generosity builds this massive shield of goodwill and organic reciprocity that will catch you when you inevitably stumble.
It's about building genuine social capital instead of just hoarding a stack of useless business cards. And this demand for absolute integrity carries over into ethical rules that the text views as completely non-negotiable. Because look, when you are under the crushing pressure of a burn rate that is threatening to bankrupt your company next week, the temptation to slightly massage the financial numbers or to make a fake promise to a client just to close a desperate sale, it's huge. Short-term survival panic can totally blind your ethical judgment.
And it is precisely in those moments of maximum vulnerability and panic that a creator's true character is tested. The book lays down absolute mandates of transparency. Under no circumstances, no matter how you try to rationalize it, are you allowed to lie to your investors about the financial reality or the operational metrics of the company. Trying to hide a crisis from your board instantly destroys fiduciary trust. Similarly, lying to a customer about what your product can actually do just to hit a monthly quota is an act of total sabotage against your own brand equity. The unvarnished operational truth is the only foundation you can actually build a solution on.
Stepping back and looking at the entire architecture of this book, I find it profoundly revealing that Kawasaki, who is this battle-hardened veteran of Silicon Valley, chooses to place this heavy treatise on ethics and integrity right at the very end. It feels like, after handing you this entire tactical arsenal to go out and conquer the market, he grabs you by the shoulders to deliver one final sobering warning. The ultimate success of any human endeavor is not measured solely by the financial value you extract from the market.
And the warning is so severe because it's based on the absolute irreversibility of a ruined reputation. In the lifespan of a company, almost any operational disaster can be fixed. If you misread the market and launch a terrible product, you can take the financial hit, rewrite the code, learn your lesson, and launch a better version in 6 months. If you run completely out of cash because you mismanaged your burn rate, it hurts, but eventually you can liquidate the company, dust yourself off, and raise money for a new idea a few years later. Technical and financial failures are totally recoverable. But if in the desperate attempt to save your company, you intentionally lie, you defraud your partners, or you betray the fundamental trust of your users, you become completely radioactive in the ecosystem. Your reputation for honor is the single asset that, once destroyed, can almost never be rebuilt. The ultimate goal isn't just to engineer a machine that prints money, it's to forge an honorable professional identity through the vehicle of your business.
The business is the vehicle. The final product is who you become. It's a philosophy of building that completely transcends basic business advice and crosses over into life design. And honestly, I think we have fully decoded the map the sources laid out for us today. From sparking the fire with a three-word mantra to surviving the valley of death with an ugly prototype, dodging the ego traps in hiring, mastering the psychology of the pitch, surviving the math of the burn rate, and finally, armor plating our ethical compass. It is a complete arsenal.
It is.
I
But
guess
so that this arsenal doesn't just remain this fun theoretical exercise for the listener, I want to leave them with a final provocative thought, something that connects all this high-level corporate mechanics directly to their personal lives. A little bit of reflective friction to chew on for the next few days.
I love it. Lay it on us.
Early on in this conversation, we talked a lot about the strategic power of compressing a massive company's mission down to a sharp three-word mantra-like democratized design to guide the daily decisions of thousands of people. So my challenge is this. What happens if you turn that exact same compression tool inward? If you forced yourself to distill your own personal complexity, what is your personal three-word mantra? What is the phrase that dictates exactly how you operate when facing daily obstacles, or how you interact with your family and colleagues? And, taking the audit one step deeper, is that personal mantra genuinely aligned with your sweet spot? Does it truly reflect the precise intersection of the skills you actually have, the value the world actually needs, and the deep-seated passion that will stop you from quitting when the resistance gets unbearable?
Wow. That is a full-blown existential audit disguised as a branding exercise. Trying to find a personal mantra that holds up on a terrible Tuesday at the office is a massive challenge. Is a phenomenal question to take a walk with and really ponder. But staying true to the core philosophy of everything we analyze today, which brutally prioritizes execution over theoretical planning, we don't want this deep dive to end just with you in a state of deep philosophical contemplation. We want to force mechanical action in the real world. So for you listening, here is your immediate call to action using the MAT framework we literally just discussed. Today, the second you finish listening to this conversation, grab a pen and physically write down on a piece of paper one single assumption that is holding up whatever project you're dreaming about or whatever initiative you're leading right now. Write down that one belief you've been treating as an absolute truth, but that you have never actually validated with hard data. And once you have it, define one specific, cheap, and fast task that you will execute tomorrow morning, no excuses, with the sole purpose of empirically proving if that belief is a solid rock of reality or just a really dangerous fantasy. Move out of the paralysis of analysis and step into the friction of action.
Because taking that step is the only way the fog actually starts to clear and the path reveals itself.
Exactly. And before we go, we want to ask you for a really simple favor, but one that has a massive structural impact. If you found some clarity in this deep dive, if any of these frameworks gave you a new angle to attack your own projects, please hit subscribe on the channel. And look, we aren't asking for this just as some hollow vanity metric for ourselves, tying it back to that philosophy of honorable networking and generosity we just talked about. Subscribing and leaving a comment is actually a small but incredibly powerful act of algorithmic generosity. By engaging with this content, you are mathematically signaling to the platforms that this information holds real value, and by doing that, you become the exact mechanism the algorithm uses to put this conversation in front of someone else tomorrow. Maybe another creator who is 5 minutes away from giving up because of their burn rate, or someone suffering under a B-player boss who desperately needs to hear this to make a hard choice today. Your engagement quite literally helps socialize the knowledge.
It's basically a form of quiet digital evangelization.
Exactly. Circling all the way back to the image we started with, that comforting, absolute clarity of a medical X-ray machine is never going to exist in the messy, chaotic world of creating new things. Uncertainty is the default state of the environment, and the ground is always going to be shifting under your feet. But you are no longer flying completely blind. You have a framework to test your ideas. You have a mantra to keep your focus sharp. You know your priority is shipping a functional prototype before a perfect one, and you have the tactical tools to survive the financial squeeze. You have everything you need. Get out into the real world and start your art. We will catch you on the next deep dive.